is the process of defending rights, is that, an imperialist imposition? Is this the new colonialism? Who are we to insist on anybody respecting rights? Now, there are various answers to this. One is that, I've traveled to a lot of countries around the world. I've never met anybody who wants to be tortured. I've never met anybody who wants to be summarily executed or who wants to be arbitrarily imprisoned. So there are various rights which, when you start getting concrete about it, who are these governments to say these are not universal values? Everybody does want them. A handful of governments find it convenient not to respect them. But if you start looking around the world, that's not where most people are. So that actually is an adequate answer for many rights. Not for all, though, and I'll get to that in a moment. There is another answer, which is sort of the positive law answer, which is, you ratified the treaty. Don't complain to me. You signed it. This means something. I'm just holding you to what you said you would do. And that, also gets you part of the way there. Not all the way, because the number of the human rights clauses are vague. And particularly when you're pushing to have a broad understanding of the right, governments can come back and claim a narrow understanding. So, but that gets you part of the way. But what people are usually talking about when they challenge the right of human rights groups or the public to uphold certain values, they're talking about the contested areas, which are, women's rights, sexual rights, religious freedom, certain rights that are where there are significant segments of populations in parts of the world that don't buy into them. And so, who is the human rights organizations? Who are we to try to uphold these rights? Now, one thing I think is worth saying at the outset is that let's take the realm of women's rights. The human rights movement is not going and saying to women in a conservative country, you must lead a modern lifestyle. We're not saying there's anything wrong with choosing to stay in the home, to subordinate yourself to your husband's desires, to live under these kind of restrictions if you choose. What we're saying is that if you choose not to, you should be free not to do that. And so understood that way, we're not imposing a lifestyle, but rather we're recognizing that within these societies, there are powerful forces and weaker forces. And the powerful forces tend to be saying, you have to lead the subordinate lifestyle. And our job is to come in and to say, well, no, that we're not buying this imposition of one person on another. We're going to stand with the weaker person and let him or her lead the lifestyle that they want. And within certain limits, within the limits that they're not doing, active harm to others, we are going to uphold their right to live the way they want to live. Now, that is, I think that philosophically is the right way to look at it. But the practical challenge is how do you convince governments to recognize those principles? Because they require a certain empathy. They require a certain Kantian perspective. If you are kind of a dominant male of the majority religion in a society, you have a hard time imagining yourself in another position. So these arguments of equitable treatment don't necessarily resonate for you because you don't see how it's going to come back and haunt you. There are other things, for example, when we're dealing with the Muslim Brotherhood today in Egypt, and we say, well, of course you've got to enforce the norm against torture. You guys are just being tortured yesterday. They can remember that, and they can envision, a change of the politics, and they realize that, yes, if they don't have a strong norm against torture, this could definitely come back to haunt them. Whether that's the case in the realm of women's rights or religious freedom or gay and lesbian rights remains to be seen. And here the difficulty that we have is that our usual tools, which are tools of shaming, do depend on the relevant public agreeing with us. And so, one way to, when people say, who are you, a small group, Human Rights Watch, to be imposing your values? We can stand back and say, well, wait a minute, what are we really talking about here? We are simply shining a spotlight. if when we shine that spotlight on somebody being arbitrarily imprisoned, if the public applauds, there's no shaming. We don't get anything done. The only way we get things done is if the public disapproves when we shine the spotlight. So, our power is entirely a product of our ability to reflect the public values of the relevant audience. Now, we obviously try to shape those values. We're not indifferent to the result. And so we will try to highlight sympathetic cases. We will try to present the matter in the best possible light. But in the end, our ability to get things done is dependent on the public disapproving of what we demonstrate.